Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Remco Blijs from EY. I'm leading our sustainable finance practice in the Netherlands, and I'm also part of our asset management group. You might have expected Iris van der Looy from DUFAS opening this session, but unfortunately she became ill this night. So yeah, you need to do it with the rest of the team. So all the best, Iris, if you're watching. Well, by means of this series of webinars, because it are 3 webinars, we are going to elaborate together with you on challenges and good practices on ESG reporting and ESG assurance. And for this series of webinars, almost 200 people subscribed. So that means that this is really a topic of interest for many of you. And not everyone is joining today, but it's spread over the 3 events. And currently people are dropping in. We see that there are more than 50 attendees already. So that's great. Thank you for joining. We are organizing this event, as you know, together with DUFAS. So it's DUFAS and EY. And we had pleasant preparations with them. And from DUFAS, we have Randy Patisiliano as well in this webinar, and he will present later on. And he is the manager of strategy and regulatory affairs of DUFAS, very well known on the topic which he's going to present later on. And from EY side, it's myself, and next to that we have Annabeth Rohr. And Annabeth Rohr is also in our sustainable finance team. And next to that, she's doing a PhD on the Erasmus University about how to integrate social and environmental impact into investment decisions. So a very relevant PhD, also for the topic of today. Let me show you the program. Let me see whether this works already. This is the program of today. So first item, we're starting with the introduction. Once again, without Iris, unfortunately. The second part is about looking at the market status, the current market status, both in the Netherlands and global. On ESG reporting and data assurance, ESG assurance. And I will present the 5-step approach that's within the brochure that we shared with you together with the invitation. Then the third part is about ESG and sustainable finance from a legal requirements perspective. Many developments over there. So Randy will give an update on that. And the last part will be providing you with some good examples of a number of companies. And we will close out with some Q&As. But we have Q&As as well during the different sessions. So if I understood it correctly, you can see on the right top of your screen, you can see a question mark. And there you can put in, well, any questions which you like. And at the end of each part, we will pick out a couple of questions and discuss those with you. And it might be that there are more questions. So what we also do is recording this event, and we will share that afterwards with you. And next to that, we will make a written summary. And that summary, we have an appendix with the Q&As which came in. And hopefully we can provide you with many of the answers. So we will see. We want to make it interactive as possible. So if you have a relevant question on the topic, please let us know. And Annabeth and Randy are watching questions coming in, and they will pick some out where relevant. All right. Let's start with the first part. This was the welcome introduction section. By the way, we will repeat that at the end as well. There are 3 webinars, and you can see also in the invitation that the next one is next Wednesday. That's specifically on ESG reporting, and there Apex Fund Services will present, and also ASR asset management. So that will be more ESG journey stories and examples from their side. And the last one will be more related to validation of ESG data, etc. So that are the upcoming events. Second part, ESG reporting and assurance market status, challenges, and a 5-step approach. Let's start with the market status. It's quite a lot of information, but I will guide you through it. If you look at the current market status on reporting and ESG assurance amongst asset managers, because that's the main focus, we see that currently it's a mixed group. So there's a mixed group of asset managers. You recognize there are in-house managers, we have institutional managers, retail managers, we have managers managing multiple asset classes, etc. So it's quite difficult to give a single conclusion on the market status, but we will try to do that. Also, if you look at reporting, that's done through different channels. So we have the investor reporting, which normally is not always public. You have the annual reports, of course, which most of them are public. We have the ESG/responsible investment reports, which many of the companies are having. You're publishing by newsletters on your website, etc. So it's a broad range of channels to report on ESG. And if you look at Solutional, they are doing a yearly analysis on specifically on annual reports, and not on the other topics. And their last report, which was October 2019, that showed that only 1/3 of the selected investment funds which they were surveying, so that only 1/3 of them were reporting on ESG policy. So that's not a big number, just 1/3. But just 8% of that big group was also reporting on qualitative impact, and only 3% of the bigger group was relating on quantitative impact of ESG factors. But next to that are the annual reports. There's more information in the ESG and responsible investment reports, but they are not always public, so we didn't investigate that. But there's more information available there. But we think, and that's number 5, that these small numbers will increase significantly, mainly related to the EU Sustainable Finance Plan, which we will discuss later. Also client demand, also the climate commitment of the financial sector, etc. That will, we think, increase that number. And on the 4th bullet, we mentioned that was specifically on reporting. If you look at assurance, the ESG assurance practice is currently limited, and we made an estimate based on what we have seen, and that just around 20% of the ESG data reported has external assurance, and that's including ESG procedures which are part of ISA 3402 reports, so more about risk and procedures covered in those reports. So there's room for increase and improvement, and we are convinced that that will be the case starting this year and over the next years. That was the Dutch overview. If we look at the global overview on ESG reporting, we as EY are doing a global ESG reporting survey. We are doing that at institutional investors across the globe, and around 300 global institutional investors were part of the survey. We have a nice report of that with much information. I will give you some highlights specifically on reporting. And it's good to know, because institutional investors are investing in many type of industries, of course. But you see that around 55% of the institutional investors are investing in financial services entities. So that can be banking institutions, insurance companies, but of course also in the asset managers. And many of the asset managers are part of a banking or an insurance company. So a lot of investment in those sectors. So that's good to know. If you look, and I'm going to highlight specifically the red circled percentages. So there's a lot of information on those slides, which we will share with you afterwards as well. But just highlighting the circled ones, there you can see, if you look at whether investors are doing a structured and formal review of ESG disclosures, we see that 72% of those investors are saying that they are doing that. So that means also that ESG information is very relevant from an investment decision point of view. And if you look at the number, if you compare it with 2018, there it was only 32%. So this number is more than doubled in 2 years, and the number will further increase. We are convinced about that. If you look at ESG risk disclosures, that's of course a specific part of ESG reporting. Then you see that investors are dissatisfied with the current ESG risk disclosures. We separated that in the ESG components. So if you look at the bottom, we have the environmental risks, the social risks, and the governance risks. And you see that they are most dissatisfied about the governance risks. So 42% of those risks is of those investors are not satisfied with the governance related risks. Maybe you should expect something that the environmental risks are, that they were more dissatisfied about that. But that's not the case, probably because if you look at the number of disclosures on the ESG topics, you see that environmental risks are quite often disclosed, or there's more information, etc. about it. So not really surprised about that, but still there's work to do on disclosing your ESG risks. We also asked that group of 300 institutional investors, what are the major challenges if you look at the usefulness and effectiveness of ESG reporting. And they mentioned that the biggest challenge is the disconnect between ESG and mainstream financial information. And if you have a look at the top 5 challenges they mentioned specifically, so that's number 1, the one that I mentioned. But also on the second place, you see that the lack of real-time information is a big issue. Well, most of you will recognize that probably, because much of the ESG information is sometimes outdated. So that's something where the industry is working on, of course. Also be driven by regulatory developments. But still, there's a huge lack in that. Also, the third item, the lack of information about how the company creates long-term value, which is quite a hot topic. Also think about Larry Fink's letter from BlackRock about engaging with all the CEOs across the world to report on long-term value creation. So not only financial value, but also what are the other value components. Well, currently there's room for improvement. The fourth place, the biggest challenge, the lack of focus of the material issues that really matter. So still companies are reporting sometimes on topics which are not really material, and well, investors think that that can improve as well. And the last one is the lack of forward-looking disclosures, which is of course very important. The same as you're doing sometimes for financial forecast, you can also do disclose on forward-looking elements related to ESG. Well, think about COVID-19, etc. It was something that none of you most likely could predict, but that are types of information. What can be the impact on investments, etc. Also related to new pandemics which might occur in the future, and how you're preparing for that in your investment investigation. That's very important. Looking at assurance specifically, we see that investors say that there is significant value in independent third-party ESG assurance, which we as EY, as also an assurance provider, yeah, we are quite happy with that result, of course. On the other hand, it's something that from an investor perspective is also very important because much of that information, ESG information, is not always available or reliable. So the more assurance will be provided on that type of information, the better the information will be. Looking at the type of assurance that they are looking for, you see that on the right side, the percentages. So you see 75% of the investors, they think there should be more assurance on the robustness of an organization's planning for climate risk. So it's just about planning. Second one is what about the procedures and the controls for ESG reporting? I think that's quite important. That is an example which you can incorporate in ISA 342 report, by the way. Third one is about climate-related disclosures. So that's really about quantifying potential climate risks, doing stress tests, scenario analysis on that type of things. And the last one is non-financial and ESG performance measures. And it's all around 70%. So those four items are close to each other. But so in general, investors are asking for more assurance on ESG information. We summarize this. This is our view. So also you see on the last topic, we are asking you as attendees as well. What do you think that the biggest challenges are related to ESG reporting and ESG assurance? You can provide that in the Q&A. So please drop any questions if you like. We summarized the 6 topics, but there might be more, of course. First one is the increasing and complex regulatory requirements, which we will discuss later. The second one, there are no generally accepted ESG reporting standards currently. We summarized a couple of good examples, by the way, but they differ on specific topics, etc. So you cannot really compare ESG reporting outcomes. The third one, I already mentioned, that is the availability and reliability of data. And that's specific. In general, the quality is improving. On the other hand, on specific ESG topics, but also on specific asset classes like private equity, corporate loans, fund of funds, etc. Yeah, that's really currently a pain to get that data. So a challenge. The third one or the fourth one is the measurement. So how can you measure the impact of ESG? And if you're really advanced, that are more the impact investment institutions, they are also monetizing the impact of externalities. And externalities are those things that you cannot determine directly in a financial component. So think about the ESG elements which you can monetize. And if you have done that, you can also determine that into a combination of financial and ESG performance. And you can both express that in euros. So there the ESG performance is becoming a relevant euro parameter, which is very useful, we think. The fifth one, is how to determine and benchmark your ambitions. So where are you in this scale of, I always call it the 40 shades of green. Many investors or many asset managers are saying that they are integrating ESG, but that can be really on the light green side, it can be on the dark green side, and everything in between. So it's difficult to benchmark yourself. And also in that perspective, and also the regulators are looking at that and warning for that. And we think that we agree with that to avoid greenwashing. So selling something to your client, assuming that it's a dark green product, however, it might be a light green product. And the sixth one is the lack of ESG risk and disclosure tooling. Well, of course, we have some tooling available for that. The same counts for the first one, by the way, for the regulatory requirements. We have the EY ESG regulatory radar for that. So there are more and more tools coming into the asset management sector, so to say, which can support you in those challenges. And I'm quite curious which questions you have. We will discuss those in a minute. I'm just switching to this one, and you might recognize that. This is what we call also to work on those challenges which we just mentioned. The 5-step approach of EY. We summarize the 5-step approach for ESG reporting in the brochure, a 2-pager, which we shared with everyone who was invited. And you see on the bottom, and it's within the red big circle, so to say, the 5 steps. And it looks a little bit easy, maybe. I always say, yeah, it's like baking a cake. If you're going to bake a cake, it are more or less the same steps. So the first one is identify your stakeholder needs. So that's about your clients. That's about if you're part of a bigger insurance company or something like that, a banking institution. What are all the stakeholders' needs? So the same as a cake. Okay, who's going to eat it? What kind of cake do they like, etc. Then the second one is set up or renew your policies related to that. The third one is determine your KPIs, collect data for that, and measure results and risks. So very important. Maybe it's quite easy stated, define your KPIs, but if you don't know upfront as part of the second step, your policy, what type of intention you have with your ESG strategy or with your impact strategy, yeah, then it's you can measure something, but you don't know what your ambition is. You don't know what you're aiming for, what kind of a change you would like to make with your investments, etc. So that's really an important step. And as part of that, you need to have a look at the availability and reliability of the data, of course. Because if you have KPIs and you want to measure, you need the data, of course. The fourth one is then really baking the cake. So after you have all the ingredients, etc., you know what you need to report. You're going to report yourself. You can do it in-house. You can do it outsourced by fund service companies or other service providers. So you can report on what you promised in your policies and what the practice is and what the outcome of it is. And the last part can be providing assurance on that type of reporting, because yeah, at the end of the day, the stakeholders want to know that the things that you're reporting, the same for financial information, is reliable. So that's what we called the 5th step. So that's the proof is in the eating, so to say. At the end of the day, if your cake is good, you present it properly, and the people who are eating it are happy, yeah, then everyone is happy. So that's think about that in setting up this easy written 5-step approach. There are more examples in the brochure, by the way, of elements of those 5 steps. And maybe it might be good and also good to switch to Annabeth in a second to have a look at it. What should that look like in practice? We call that the ESG roadmap. That's on this slide. Can you elaborate on that one, Annabeth, please?
Yes, and I see some nice questions coming in already, so maybe we can as well consider some of those. Let me see if I... Oh, never mind. We see the roadmap and it has a few components in there, and it's not a particular order in a sense that you have to do it in this order, but of course it all starts with an integrated strategy and looking at sustainability from an integral perspective, and we'll look at some examples of that later on as well. And having a broad stakeholder approach, some questions coming in of that as well. It's good to know what your stakeholder are requesting, and knowing that through a stakeholder dialogue and a materiality assessment also helps overcoming some of the challenges that Remco discussed earlier. Having a focus on which are the most important topics or ESG topics to focus on. And if you have that clear, you can move towards formulating some KPIs and considering also some impact measurement in that respect. Well, the next step is ESG risk management. And I already said it's not a particular order, because it could be that for your asset manager, this is actually the first step, how to adapt and how to see all the climate risks coming up, but also other ESG related risks. Brandy will touch upon reporting and the upcoming requirements in this respect. And this will, of course, then lead to external reporting in different forms. And we see that if you have this integrated story, that really also helps in building and knowing what to report on and which KPIs to choose, which is both an added value for your organization as a whole, but as we see in the current market, of course, also a competitive advantage. Maybe we can raise some questions, Remco, you can answer them. We had two questions relating to stakeholders. One is, okay, investors are using this non-financial information, but how can also other stakeholders make use of this information? And the other question coming in is, what if there is not that much direction from investors and stakeholders on what KPIs or what direction to choose in this respect? What should you do then?
Okay, that's a good one. To start with the last one, what KPIs, etc. Yeah, that's relating to the strategy of your portfolio or your fund. We see these days that many of the investors, specifically the institutional investors, are aiming for having a focus on specific sustainable development goals. So one of the 17 icons you might know. So we see many companies integrating their KPIs, relating those KPIs to the SDGs, and then it's based on what the stakeholders that you have or the investors that you have are aiming for. So to give an example, if you are managing the portfolio for a pension fund, and let's say that's a pension fund, well, in a certain industry, then it might make sense that you are including the SDGs from that specific industry, what those companies are aiming for, to change that, to integrate that into your KPIs. And the first question about other stakeholders, yeah, that can be anyone. That can also be governmental stakeholders, can be people working at your company. Yeah, sometimes we're forgetting that, but it's also in terms of recruitment, etc., and whether people like working at your company. It's also related to what's your vision on specific ESG related topics. Are you working on that? Do you want to be a leader in the market, etc.? So there are much more stakeholders, and yeah, if you're sharing reports and put everything on your website, etc., then you can organize events around it. So many opportunities in that perspective. Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe there might be more questions, but I want to switch to Randy, also looking at the time, because that's an important part of this webinar, looking at, okay, what's next in terms of legal requirements. May I give the floor to you, Randy?
Thank you, Remco. Well, it will be a challenge to run through the entire legislative framework within 15-20 minutes, but I will do my best effort to do so. When it comes to ESG reporting and disclosures, there are a number of pieces of legislation within the EU Sustainable Finance Plan, which was launched in 2018 of the European Commission, which are particularly relevant for asset managers. Some piece of legislation which we'll deep dive into a bit later are directly addressed to asset managers. Some piece of legislation are quite relevant as well, as it enables asset managers to comply with certain reporting requirements, such as the NFRD. But let's zoom into the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and I will come later on what it actually requires you to do so. But first, let me explain some scoping and the principles of certain definitions. Well, first of all, it's good to know that there are three principal definitions you have to look at. First off, the financial market participant definitions. What are included within that scope of parties? Well, it includes asset managers, offerers of UCITS funds, alternative investment funds, but it also includes, for example, credit institution and pension product providers. Then you have also the financial advisors, who are also included in the scope of SFDR, and that also includes asset managers, UCITS, and even the alternative investment funds, which offering investment advice. It's particularly to note that under this definition, UCITS managers and AFD managers who provide portfolio management do not seem to be included, but it could be also that is unintended mission of the Commission, but it's something worthwhile mentioning. Now, if you look at the financial products, obviously investment funds are falling within that group as well, but it is also good to emphasize that the provision of individual portfolio managers is also classified as being in a financial product within the SFDR, which is a bit strange because on the MiFID, it normally it classifies as an investment service, but because it's under the scope of SFDR, it may also mean that you have to disclose individual mandates on websites, etc. So that's going to be a big challenge to look at. So what does it basically does? What does the SFDR require to do so? Well, first of all, the main principal things you have to do is that you have to integrate sustainability risk in investment decision, in your investment decision or advisory making process. That is also a requirement which also will be incorporated in the amendments of UCITS and AFD and also into MiFID. So in your organization, as a part of your organizational requirement, sustainability risk will be a part of your risk framework. So next to financial risk, sustainability risk will be included as well. Secondly, what you also have to do, and we come to speak to that later on also, is that you have to include or decide whether you include principal adverse impact of your investment decisions and on sustainability factors. Also, that's something which will be part of your organizational requirements in the UCITS, AFD, and MiFID amendments. It's good to emphasize also what is being considered to be sustainability risks. That is also defined within the SFDR, and what are sustainability factors is also defined under the SFDR. Well, coming back to what is being considered to be principal adverse impacts indicators. Well, as most of you have seen, is that, and probably also have responded to, is that the European supervisors have consulted on the way forward on the disclosures on principal adverse impact indicators. So what the proposal of the European supervisors is that if you that you need to disclose 23 mandatory indicators, and there are also 18 other indicators set forth in the consultation, which are actually optional. You have to get one indicator from each table, which is in that consultation. Maybe it's good to emphasize also in terms of scoping before I go further on the indicators itself. The indicators, the principal adverse impact statement is a comply or explain, is based on a comply and explain principle. So you have to disclose these in principal adverse impact statements, and if you do not want to disclose it, you have to explain why you're not doing that. There is one exemption that is for the financial market participants who also qualify on the NFRD criteria, which means a financial market participant which has over 500 employees. They have to for them the publication of the principal adverse impact statement is mandatory. So what have they proposed in their consultation, the European supervisors? Like I said, there are, which you can see on the screen, a number of 32 mandatory indicators, of which 16 one of is more environmental, and 16 is more on the social part. Now, it's good to emphasize it's still a draft. It is a discussion, consultation paper, and we've seen a lot of feedback, and also from DUFAS we provide feedback on the indicators, and one of a proposal from our side is to reduce the mandatory indicators to, and I think we've come to a set of 11 indicators, and have the other remaining indicators included in the consultation paper as being optional for each asset manager to use where appropriate. So we have to wait and see what the outcome will be on this discussion, and I understand the outcome will be somewhere in December or January. Then we get more clarity how the European supervisors will deal with that. Another thing you have to do as an asset manager on the SFDR is the product disclosures you have to adhere to. Basically, the SFDR puts financial products in 3 buckets, and starting actually with the Article 8 bucket, which are the products where ESG characteristics are being promoted. It's not entirely clear what is meant by promoting, so that's something we have to see how that works out in the final draft. But the idea is if you intend to promote ESG characteristics in your products, you have to meet a number of disclosure criteria. Disclosure requirements which are also elaborated upon in the draft consultation paper of the European supervisors. So what you see in the screen, I'm not going to deal with it line by line, but what you can see is that you have to adhere to a lot of disclosures in that sense. And why is this important? This is important also with the link with MiFID, but I will touch upon that later. So the second bucket is actually Article 8, Article 9 ESG product disclosures. And the difference between Article 8 and Article 9 is that Article 9 concerns a financial product which has a sustainable investment as an objective. So there you see one of the key differences, and also the key difference is also in terms of intent. So if you really have a financial product where your objective is to only put sustainable investments as a defined in the SFDR, then you can qualify as an Article 9 product. So basically what you could say, you got different shades of green. Article 8 is green, and maybe Article 9 you could say it's dark green. Now, if you do not qualify for Article 8 or Article 9, you're not going to promote this ESG, or you're not going to have a ESG and sustainable investment as an objective. Then you fall in the remaining buckets on the Article 6 and Article 7. And that means you do not have to fulfill all disclosures, but you do have to integrate certain sustainability risks. So there are some requirements you have to deal with. So just one last comment on the link of this classification to MiFID. MiFID is going to be amended as well, and in terms of product governance requirements, but also in terms of KYC requirements, when you doing client inventory with the client on when you provide investment advice or portfolio management. So if a client comes to you and has a sustainability preferences, then you have to link the sustainability preferences a client has to the classifications of the SFDR. So that means if as a client you want to only have investments which have sustainable investment as an objective, you fall in Article 9 category. So that's basically the link in MiFID to discuss it shortly. So there is also, obviously there's a link to the taxonomy, which also a significant part of the entire EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan. Just to briefly say, well, what is the scope also on the taxonomy, which party falls on the taxonomy. Also asset managers fall under the taxonomy, but under the taxonomy regulation, NFRD companies are also included and are also to obliged to report on their taxonomy aligned activity. So that is that's a major thing to remember. Now, what just in brief, what is actually the taxonomy? Basically, it's a classification system. It is a classification system how to determine certain economic activities, and it's a classification of which, whether a certain economic activity contributes to certain sustainable objectives, environmental sustainable objectives as defined in the regulation, and you could see them outlined. One of the objectives is, for example, climate change mitigation. It's in the taxonomy. There's a third step, a three-step approach, because apart from the fact that it has to contribute to a sustainable objective, say for example climate change mitigation, you also have to meet the do not significantly harm criteria, which basically means, well, if you contribute to one of the objectives, it does not have to can have as a consequence that it is detrimental to one of the other 5 of the environmental objectives. And the third step you have to look at is that that there are some minimum safeguards which you have to adhere to on the social part and on the governance part. So the taxonomy actually, and the taxonomy regulation, is really focused on the environmental part, not so on the social parts. That's something which has developed in the future. Now, what about timelines? Just a short briefing on timelines. As the most of you know, the SFDR will kick in 10 March 2021. Not all requirements will be have to be met at that stage, but you could see in the dependency on timelines, you could also see the dependency on the taxonomy regulation. For example, if you have to, we have seen actually, if you're going to develop an Article 9 product, you may have to, you need data from, for example, NFRD companies who are obliged to report on their taxonomy aligned activities. Only when you see what the timelines were on NFRD is that they start actually with 1st of January 2022, whereas your reporting requirements will fall on the same date. So you could see in the timelines, and that's something which the Commission also recognizes, there is certain time challenge to meet the requirements because of the different timelines for different parties. So that's actually in a nutshell. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about it as well, but it's for the sake of time, in a nutshell, what I would like to present on the legal requirements for ESG reporting.
Very good, Randy. Good overview. A lot of new items, new terms, etc. So it's good to mention, by the way, that Randy, if I'm correct, you're also going to do a separate webinar on the SFDR somewhere early October, I think. So
it's true.
So there's more detail to come. So you can subscribe for that, only for members of DUFAS, by the way. But Annabeth, any questions popping in? Burning questions for now?
I see two questions relating to the scoping. There's one question which relates to, is SFDR also applicable to a discretionary mandate? And the second one relates to the question whether I fall into which bucket. So what if I have a mandate which has a side objective to reduce the CO2 carbon emissions? Would that qualify as an Article 9 product?
Very good question. To start with the first one, yes, discretionary portfolio management falls within under the SFDR because it qualifies as a financial product. So that's the first answer to this question. On the mapping of products, that's a very difficult one. There's a lot of discussion about how do you map Article 8 versus Article 9 products. Essentially, what we also heard from the European supervisor is also about intent. So in that respect, if you want to build up a portfolio where your intention is to invest only in investment products or underlyings, with the aim of reducing carbon emission exposure, that could qualify as an Article 9 product, indeed. But then you really have to adhere and look at the requirements which SFDR prescribes.
Maybe one question on the principal adverse impacts indicators. There's one question relating to how to deal with these indicators when shorting stocks.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
When shorting stocks, so when going short on stocks.
That's a difficult one. I'm not sure I can answer. There's no clarity about that, but it's something we have to look into. But it's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's a good one to follow up. Before this discuss. Yeah.
Might be good. That's the advantage of having 3 webinars. That during the next webinar, maybe we can elaborate on some of those as well.
Exactly.
But, once again, we will try to answer those in the Q&A section of the written summary. Okay, thanks a lot, Randy. Very useful. I learned a lot about it myself as well, so that's good. Let's switch to some good examples. Then we are going back to reporting specifically. And Annabeth, you have selected some nice examples. We would like to emphasize that there are more in the market, but we just want to show you a couple of them. So tell us about it, Annette.
Yes, indeed. There are quite some good examples in the Dutch market, and many of whom are in the call with us today. And in short, a bit of the characteristics following also the roadmap that we just showed. It's all about having an integrated strategy in this respect on sustainability, sustainable or impact investing, whatever is your aim in this respect, which contains some objectives and targets, regular reporting in this respect, with metrics and some updates on the objectives. And of course, it's a search onto what are the objectives and the metrics which suit, where should I focus on. But good practices provide some transparency in this regard on the challenges and also some changes. I mean, it's a development in this respect of both data and approach. So nothing strange to just disclose what changed and what are the reasons in that respect. So for now, I'll briefly share some examples from NNIP and Kempen. And in the next webinar, as mentioned, ASR Asset Management will share some on their ESG journey. So maybe we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is coming from the NNIP Responsible Investment Report on their green bond strategy. It provides some insights into the saved emissions by the green bonds and their indication. And they also provide some explanation on how to assess this information. Of course, it's sometimes hard to understand what does avoided emissions or CO2 emissions mean in terms of size. They indicated here in terms of households and cars. And then below you see the exposure to the UN SDGs. Of course, SDG 7 and 13, but depending on where their green bond proceeds are used for, of course, also other SDGs can be impacted by green bonds. Another example of NNIP relates to the carbon footprint of the Global Sustainable Opportunity Funds. This is from their website, actually. And it's very nice to see directly next to the financial performance, there's some environmental performance. You can click around for the absolute and the relative metrics. There's some explanation on how to interpret the metrics. And that's very nice also because we see some differentiation in the market, some taking absolute emissions, some taking relative emissions. So nice that you can have a choose in this, although the mainstream is a bit to report on the relative emissions per million invested. To show some examples of Kempen. This is of their global impact pool. It's coming from their jaarverslag Verantwoord en betrokken beleggen 2019. And this is an overview of the SDGs, which SDG sub-targets are touched upon by the different parts of the global impact pool. On the next slide, you see they zoom in on SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and they use the 5-step approach of the impact management project. And these steps also help in preventing some of the criticism that is out there and facing some of the challenges by providing some clear insights into what is your impact or your outcome towards, who does it contribute to, what is the size, contribution related to additionality, whether it happened anyhow or not, and the risk, like what are the risks relating to this outcome and what are your anticipations in this respect. For example, in the picture you see that this particular fund impacts mostly European countries, and seeing at the colors, of course there are major challenges remain. That's not the case, but there are challenges in this respect, and it's an important topic. So it's a nice nuance of knowing that the SDGs pose a large challenge on emerging countries, maybe in particular, but that this particular fund does have an impact on countries that have challenges in this respect, and knowing also on the right hand what this impact might look like in terms of energy usage and the other metrics. And if we go on, you can see some summary in this respect relating to the targets and objectives. Here there's chosen per fund for some metrics relating to really the core of the fund in this respect. People reached, emerging consumers reached, jobs supported, with metrics for 2019, the target, and also how far percentage-wise the target is reached. And relating to the good practice mentioned, there are some dilemmas on the right. Yeah, what challenge do we face when we want to report on this, or when we want to achieve a certain impact or a certain objective? And it's nice to provide some insights also to the reader. We know that this topic is in development. Also, the upcoming legislation is posing quite some challenges. And I think it's good to be honest in this respect and share all the challenges in that respect. So I think that's it for the good examples. I don't know if there's any questions, Remco, that we can answer.
Randy, did you have a look at it as well? Because I was also clicking on the side, but
yes, there was also a question whether EY was involved in the good examples.
Well, we chose to be a bit in part today, so in these particular examples, this was not our direct contribution, but there are many parties involved today at which we were involved. Yeah.
Okay. And I see another one which I also like, by the way, that's a little bit related to your story, Randy. That's whether the for the pre-contractual information that also require disclosures in the kits. Do you know that?
It's a good question, a very relevant one. If you look at pre-contractual disclosures under the SFDR, you mainly have to look at the prospectus of funds. At this stage, I haven't seen that disclosures, such disclosure will feed into the PRIPS kit or the usage kit. Obviously, if that will be the case, that will also mean that the PRIPS kits, the PRIPS and usage kits have to be amended. That type of regulation, and at this stage, I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, thanks a lot, Randy. Thank you as well, Annabeth, for your contribution. I don't know, we have some minutes left. Is there any other question which we have seen which we still would like to address? And if not, we're going to close out. Annabeth, Randy, any topics which you've seen?
No, I think for now.
Yeah, there's just one other question. When a pension fund has segregated mandates managed by an external asset manager, is the mandate in scope of SFDR? Who's responsible to comply? That is a good question. At the end of the day, the external asset manager has to comply also with certain product disclosures. So basically, at the end of the day, they have to comply as well. But I have to get back whether the pension fund has certain obligations as well. Because in principle, not all pension funds do not fall under the SFDR. These not all pension products fall under the SFDR, but it's something we have to look into.
Okay, very good, Randy. Then, yeah, I'm going to close out. I would like to thank Randy and Annabeth for their excellent contributions. I would like to thank Noah for doing all the organization around the event itself, and the producer. And of course, I would like to thank you as attendees joining us. During the whole event, there were more than 100 attendees, so that's very good. We're looking forward for the next sessions. Once again, you will receive the invites for those. If you would like to have some other people joining this one as well, you can share those links with them. Next one, we will talk with ASR and Apex Fund Services about their ESG journey, also reporting, etc. So we're looking forward. Sorry, Noah.
Yes, is it possible for you to answer the question about the availability of slides and recordings after this session?
Yeah, very good to know. I mentioned that in the beginning. We will share the summary, the slides, and the recording afterwards, so you can share that further indeed. So having said that, I would like to thank you all again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hoping to see you at the next event. Thanks a lot.